Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our usual co-host, Marianne Lee, and our new co-host, Dan Schneier. Dan, how are you doing on your first edition of the Fantasy Slant?
I'm excited, Michael. I can't wait to get going here. I've been wanting to get on this for a while, and I just love talking matchups for the week. It's pretty much my favorite thing to do. Some people love their waiver wire. Some people love a lot of the other parts of this, but for me, it's all about the matchups and what's coming up.
Good. Well, and you said it. I mean, there is quite the line in the queue for people to get on this show, so you should feel honored and lucky and all of the above. So the first question to you, Dan, and me and Brandon have already answered this, but we answered this a couple weeks ago. How did you get into fantasy football? And not working for Pro Football Focus, but, you know, when you were like a kid or like when there was no money or, well, there's no money now, but you know what I mean? Like when you first started doing it.
All right, so I have a great story. I thought you were going to ask how I got into Pro Football Focus. There's actually a great story for that too, but we'll answer this question one at a time.
Right.
For me, fantasy sports started at a really a weirdly and disgustingly early age. My father was a big fantasy sports guy. He started when fantasy baseball was a thing, when they used to write by hand down their teams, and they used to do the stats by hand. So he took me when I was 8 years old, and I'm never going to forget this, 8 years old, to a AL-only fantasy baseball auction league. It was one of the craziest things. My favorite story from that was that they had a minor league, I guess it was a farm system type draft after the auction, and someone in that farm system draft selected Hideki Matsui when he was still in Japan as like a prospective pick, like before he came over the Yankees. There was no news about it, nothing. He was tearing up the Japan League, and they're like, I'm bidding on Hideki Matsui, he's mine. So that was when I first got into fantasy sports, and for me, football was overtook baseball really quickly because I was also a diehard New York Giants fan. Around that same time, I went to my first Giants game, and from there, I just loved every second of it.
Wow, that is like throwing you right in the fire, man. Like you aren't starting off with the easy stuff. That is like complicated stuff. So good for you. You know, cool. I started at like 8 too, but it was your standard like football league, and you started like 8 players a week, and that was it. Not this like AL only auction, blah blah blah.
Right. Well, you got to keep in mind it's also jaded me a little bit because now I pretty much refuse to do any snake drafts. I hate them. I think they're the worst thing ever. And right. Jeff Ratcliffe actually gave me a lot of shit for that. Over email because he thinks they take just as much skill as auctions, but I will, I guess, gracefully disagree with that.
You will stick with it. That's okay.
Yeah, we'll stick with it.
All right. Well, glad to have you here, Dan. Let's get started. So we want to look at week 2 and specifically players that had a really good week 1 first and see if they can continue. Brandon, I know you have a crush on the Red Rifle, Andy Dalton. He had a big week in week 1. Can he keep it up?
Oh, absolutely. Red Rifle is my guy. I have him in so many leagues. I was embarrassed, and now I'm just like strutting around like a peacock. You know, the guy had the third highest points per dropback last year. He was having career numbers, and then all of a sudden he gets injured, and it just blew everything up. And then everyone forgot about him, and they're like, Now listen, is he bad at prime time? Yes, he is. Is he bad in the playoffs? Absolutely. But he's a 1 p.m. superstar, and I'm all in. All in on Andy Dalton at 1 p.m. for the rest of the season. And you want to know why? A.J. Green. Magic. And I actually don't think Darrelle Revis is going to be as terrible this week. I think it's really unfortunate. And, man, A.J. Green, what a classy guy, too, to say, you know, listen, you know, we're just all trying to get to where he is. And I don't think that it's Revis Island anymore. I'm not scared, but I don't think he's so bad that he's going to give up 10 catches on 10 targets. That was, I think, an anomaly. And just really an illustration of how good AJ Green is. So yeah, if AJ Green misses a game because his baby's born on a Sunday, that's unfortunate. But there's only a 14% chance that happens, and you're going to be happy every other week of the year. Unless, of course, some freak injury happens, which we cannot predict, and he doesn't have an injury history to get freaked out about. So yes, I think that all signs point towards yes, he absolutely is the legit deal.
Well, and for the record, he is playing at 1 o'clock on this Sunday, Brandon, against the Steelers. So that's
MVP. Just don't put him at 8:30, please.
Right. All right. So a receiver that did very well, sort of along the lines of AJ Green, but Willie Snead over in New Orleans completely ripped apart Oakland. Dan, you cover the Giants, and the Giants are playing the Saints this weekend. So,
Mm.
like, how excited should we be for Willie Snead? Like, on a scale of 1 to 10? Like 10, 11, 12, what?
Okay, so I'm all in on Snead this week. I'll give it a 9.5 just because I think there's a lot to be said about this Giants defense. They're really an improved unit from last year. Just the difference that these three players have made their three big free agent signings. Olivier Vernon at defensive end, Damian Harris at defensive tackle, and Janoris Jenkins at cornerback, who actually shadowed Dez Bryant last week, which people don't know about, and allowed 1 reception for 8 yards. Pretty impressive stuff. It's a big deal, but really their biggest impact has come in the run game. 15 of 20 tackles against Ezekiel Elliott last week were from the defensive line. And as far as the passing game goes, the same issue in week 1 for the Giants is the issue that's been there since 2015, 2014, and it's their inability to cover the middle of the field. Where does Willie Snead do his best work? The middle of the field. Drew Brees and him have developed a nice rapport. It's getting better. A lot of people were sleeping on Snead in drafts this season. In August, it started to pick up a little bit, but people worried about Michael Thomas, Kobe Fleener, where the target's going to come from. But Snead is that intermediate option. He's that chain mover. He's that guy over the middle. And against this Giants defense, they like to blitz a lot of safeties. They like to do a lot of creative things, and it leaves guys like Kelvin Shepard at middle linebacker, a former washed-up veteran who's bounced around a bunch of teams, in the middle of that field, really with nowhere to go. And I think Snead's going to eat up that middle of the field. And really, the Saints have no hope at all of stopping this Giants offense. They allowed Manning to throw for 350 yards and 6 touchdowns on just 30 attempts last year. So it's going to be one of those games where the game flow works in the favor of the Saints passing game, and all those underneath targets are going to be part garbage time, but part at the beginning of the game, and just it's going to be a lot of volume for Snead.
Well, can I also chime in about Kobe Fleener, though, real quick? I was the only person who has ever said that we should not be starting Kobe Fleener, and I'm going to stand by this.
I remember it.
I'm like, I don't get it. I don't understand. He has been very clear. The team has been very clear. Drew Brees has been very clear that Kobe Fleener has had a difficult time transitioning to the system. They were honest with us during the preseason. He only caught 4 passes for 27 yards off of 6 targets. He didn't necessarily have a drop per se, but it definitely wasn't clicking, and he certainly wasn't making big plays happen the way that he did in Stanford and in Indianapolis. But again, the number one thing that happened when I said, wow, yay, Kobe Fleener's with the New Orleans Saints, before all this news came out, everyone on my Twitter timeline from Indy was like, yeah, good luck with that. And I was like, yeah, I know he has those bad drops. I know they're meme-worthy. It's fine. But seems like he's taken that to New Orleans. Now, I think it will click, but in my opinion, until it starts clicking, he is a low-end starter for a tight end that you're really only starting in 14-team leagues. And I'm going to stand by that. I just think they have too many weapons. Willie Snead is a better weapon.
Well, and just a quick note on targets. Willie Snead had 100 targets last year. You had Ben Watson with over 100. You had Marcus Colston with about 70. And Colston and Watson aren't there anymore. So there's literally 170 targets there besides the 100 that Snead had last year. So it's not like Snead's work is going to go away. I mean, look, Michael Thomas could pick up a lot of that, sure. Kobe Fleener eventually, maybe. But there's a lot of targets to go around there that it won't affect Snead at all.
And their defense is still terrible. The premise remains, it's not like all of a sudden they beefed up on defense and we're all worried, which by the way, the exaggeration, I think also with Jacksonville that their defense is all of a sudden amazing. I think it's just not true either, but it's going to happen. But I guess for me, I don't think it's bad to say you have to see it from Kobe Fleener before you play him again. Unless it's DFS and you're swinging for the fences, but in your season-long leagues, I don't understand.
Right. Well, especially if he has not shown it before. It's very
different than Gary Barnidge.
Oh well, Gary Barnidge is a saint. We don't need to, bring.
I know. We all blame RG3 for that, Gary. Don't worry. We'll see you next week.
Sorry, Dan. If you didn't know, Gary Barnidge is a saint around here, and if you disparage him, you will be kicked off the show so fast.
Don't worry. Now that Josh McCown's back, I'm back to my all in on.
There you go. Aren't we all? Okay.
Sorry. I mean, we hope RG3 gets well soon. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't cheer for injuries. I'm just saying I cheer for Gary Barnidge. So it is what it is.
We all do. All right. So let's look at, this was an interesting case in week 1. Spencer Ware of the Chiefs, obviously a very popular pick going into week 1 on daily sites and just in general with Jamal Charles being out. He totaled nearly 200 total yards. Brandon, you've got Jamal Charles, who it's not official that he's not playing yet in week 2, but it looks likely that he won't. So can we expect the same out of Ware again this week?
No, because he's not playing the San Diego Chargers.
Okay.
Talk about another team that's defense didn't improve. Certainly the Kansas City Chiefs their offense took a whole half to warm up, and then all of a sudden they came out just like fire. It was nuts. Everybody was on point. It was great. So, I still like Ware as a starter, which in my opinion, Ware is always a starter. Kansas City's lead back is always a starter. Every week. I don't have a problem with that. It's the system, it's the usage, it's the opportunities, it's whatever word you want to use, but it is what it is. The confusion comes when Jamal Charles comes back. I am under the impression that Jamal Charles is still the lead back and still the face of this franchise. It's not even just that he's the lead back. We're not talking about a Matt Jones situation here. We're talking about Jamal Charles. Now, do I still think that they'll use Ware? Yes, but I still think that they believe that Jamal Charles is a superstar if he's healthy. But the question is, when's he going to get healthy? I don't know that answer, but certainly I'm starting Ware whenever I can in season-long leagues until Jamal Charles gets back, and then I'm going to assess the situation.
Dan, Spencer Ware is a very popular topic on this episode, or on this podcast, I should say. Our former co-host for this slot, Mike Tagliere, is a big Spencer Ware fan. So where are you on the Spencer Ware line, Dan?
So I'm kind of on the same boat, I guess, as Tags and Brandon here, because I think he's a must-start, and I think he's, at this point, matchup independent at this point. I don't think it is based on the matchups. I mean, the thing with Ware is, okay, so he didn't have a high draft. He wasn't a high draft pick. He wasn't somebody who people kind of got all.
He wasn't drafted at all.
He wasn't drafted at all, right, at LSU. So he's kind of like he kind of got lost in the shuffle there. But those type of things kind of tend to stick with you, or at least stick with fantasy owners. And I'm not sure that's really fair. I mean, if you look at last year, he averaged the most yards after contact per attempt. Really, the next closest guy was Le'Veon Bell, and he wasn't too close behind. He also had our fourth best running grade overall of all running backs. I mean, we're talking about a guy who the one question mark coming into this season, at least for me, was can he do anything in the passing game? And we saw in week 1 he can. So now that we know he's one of those kind of two-dimensional running backs, a guy who's really effective as a runner, really effective after contact, and can contribute in the passing game, there's no reason to bench him in any matchup in my mind.
Okay.
I would say, yeah, but Houston gave up the 10th fewest rushing yards last week, the 10th fewest rushing yards, fantasy points. I shouldn't say that. So 10th fewest fantasy points last season, 10th fewest fantasy points last week. They're a pretty good defense, and Kansas City's on the road as opposed to home. It just is the opposite situation as being home against the Chargers. I'm not saying he's not still a starter, but I don't think you should expect 30 points. I think that's
200 total yards every week. That's
right.
I think yeah, that's fair. I mean, the Chargers were our worst ranked run defense last year, and they didn't look improved at all in week 1, especially without Bosa. So, I mean, that's definitely fair. I'm not expecting our top 3 RB1 production, but as far as if you're going to bench him or sit him based on the matchup, I just think he's the type of guy who should be in every lineup.
Well, yeah, like Brandon said, I mean, no matter who it is, whether it's him or Wes or Charles,
right,
you start him and don't think about it. So,
yep.
All right, they're playing the Texans, the Chiefs are. A wide receiver that broke out, if you will, Will Fuller, 5 for 107 and a touchdown, and probably dropped another long touchdown. Dan, are you buying Will Fuller?
So Will Fuller for me is an interesting one because he obviously didn't grade out too well by our draft analyst at CFF, and he's also probably the least buzzy first-round rookie receiver I can ever remember since I started covering fantasy football. Like, this guy's stuck in like the late rounds through the entire offseason, even after he started working almost exclusively with the first-team offense. But now it's pretty obvious that he's got talent. I mean, he's described as just Deshaun Jackson light. I think he actually adds a little more than that because I think he does a few things. I'm not going to say he's as good as Deshaun Jackson at the vertical game, of course not. But he has a little more versatility to his game, and it's clear that this Texans offense is going to throw a lot more than people expected. Obviously, Lamar Miller got his touches, but also Brock Osweiler got going last week, and that's because throughout his tenure as head coach of the Texans, Bill O'Brien's run a really fast and up-tempo offense, and I think that really plays into Fuller's favor as the number 2 there. So I'm still in on Fuller, obviously more as a back-end flex or this week or a wide receiver 3. I don't think we're going to see consistent production yet, but I still like him, and I don't think the Bears was any particularly amazing matchup for him either. So
Yeah. No, I think, he's got upside. I mean, we say it all the time, but he's got upside.
I was asked if I would start Cobb or Fuller.
Oh no.
No, come on.
What are your
That's
thoughts?
silly.
I think I'm going. I think that's
Was
got
it a Twitter egg that asked you that? It was.
Yeah.
No, it was a regular human.
Oh, interesting. Well, what did you
That's
say?
all right.
Is this like a trick question or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually said I know I sound crazy. I'm kind of leaning towards Fuller.
Wow.
Hey now, okay. That's our
I
first
think
hot
that
take of the episode. Okay.
I just think the Minnesota Vikings defense is legit. I think Jordy's still getting back into form. I think Cobb is still getting back into form. I think they'll be fine, but I think this is an every week thing for Will Fuller. I think that he's going to get 8 or more targets every single week, and that's how they're going to get Hopkins open, because otherwise Hopkins is going to be double teamed. And let's be honest, Brock Osweiler, although doing much better than we thought, right, still is not accurate enough to get a pin right through there and double team to Hopkins. They got to get him on man-to-man. So if they don't do that, they can't get Brock and Hopkins to connect. So I think that this Will Fuller thing is legit. So I know it sounds crazy. It's like, I don't know that. I said, talk to me later in the week. Maybe I'm just being feisty, but I said, I think I'm going Fuller. That's crazy, but that's how much I believe.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll check back next week and see how right or wrong you were.
Oh, well,
All right.
Minnesota Vikings.
There you go. You heard it here first, people. So start Will Fuller. That's what Brandon said. Start Will Fuller no matter what, and you'll win your game this week. All right. Let's look at some players that did not have a great week one and see if they can bounce back or not. I will go to you, Brandon, with Devontae Freeman. You are our Devontae Freeman resident expert. So is this was his week one disappointment temporary, or is this a sign of things to come? And not just with him, but just his usage and Coleman and all that.
Oh, I wrote a little thing about, the week one disappointments and what to do with them. So if Devontae Freeman, so there is news right now that he has been limited at practice with a quadricep injury. And in my opinion, if he was injured during the game, that changes this entire narrative, right? As far as like, is it really even between him and Coleman? Is it really this or that? I think it's very different. The snap counts were relatively the same. But I want to just read you Devontae Freeman's numbers. Okay, so his yards per carry were 1.8. Tragic, right? His yards after contact, 1.8. That's the same number. He never had a chance to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
He was literally getting hit at or behind the line of scrimmage. So then, okay, he caught all 4 of his targets. Okay, so no drops, nothing tragic happened here for 20 yards. Oh, that's so bad, right? Okay, great. Do you want to know what his average depth through per ADOT was? Sorry, I'm just not even going to talk. Negative 1.3.
Well, that's not good.
His depth through aimed throw was behind him.
Yeah.
What?
It's not good.
So he actually averaged 6.3 run after catch yards.
Okay, so you're telling me it's the offensive line. That's what you're saying.
But that's disconcerting. Not just for him, but for Coleman. This isn't even about the timeshare. This is about the offense. This is about their offensive line. This is about pass protection. There are so many issues here. It just boggles my mind. But I don't think that it's that all of a sudden they're going to go away from Freeman. If you look at these numbers, you go, man, what could he have done? There's nothing else this guy could have done. So when they put in Coleman, what they were trying to do is to mix up the looks. They put Coleman outside, and we all know that Freeman is the pass catching back, so it was just bizarre, the kind of formations that they were doing. They were trying to throw off Tampa Bay. The problem is Kyle Shanahan's offense is incredibly predictable. He always goes to his lead wide receiver and his lead running back, so they shut them down. That's exactly what Tampa Bay decided to do, and that was the right decision. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think that the conversation has been skewed to, great, I'm going to start Coleman. I'm getting all sorts of should I start Coleman questions this week. And I'm like, no. What are you talking about? He had 2 good catches. That's it. It's not like he was averaging 2.8 yards per carry.
Oh, it's not good. Believe me.
It wasn't like he ran away with the job. We can have a conversation about Ware and Charles. I will respect that conversation. This conversation just is bad.
All right, so Tevin Coleman or Randall Cobb, Brandon? Let's get to the bottom of the barrel.
I think I'll go Cobb there.
Oh,
I'll go Cobb.
Right.
Yeah, you big jerk.
All right, Dan, let's talk about Dez Bryant. You cover the Giants like we mentioned. You saw a lot of Dez Bryant on Sunday. Held to 1 catch. did have a touchdown called back. Is this a case of he's got Dak Prescott as his quarterback, so he's going to suffer a little bit, or was this just a blip?
I can't believe how much, at least on my Twitter feed, people are going nuts about this Dez Bryant first game. 1 catch, 8 yards, 5 targets. That was his stat line. And people are panicking. They're finally starting to say, okay, now this is what it's going to look like with Dak Prescott. But I don't think that's a fair thing to say, because if you watch the game and if you actually read all of the post-game press clippings, you'll see that this was the Cowboys' strategy, right? So they came out and their idea was to give Dak Prescott about the easiest possible game plan he could possibly have. So it was a lot of underneath stuff to Cole Beasley. It was a lot of underneath stuff to Jason Witten. We're talking about almost 20 targets between the two of them, I think. I'd have to look that up. I'm sorry, don't quote me on that. But we're talking about these two things, and this is the game plan they had, and it was working for a while. They control. I was actually rewatching the game, and with 5 minutes left in the second quarter, the Cowboys had over 22 minutes of time possession, which is an unbelievable statistic. So it was working, and then obviously the Giants adjusted at half and the shutdown, and that kind of affected the entire offense, Dez Bryant included. But I think there are better days to come, because this is Prescott's first game, and they're going to open up things on that offense a little more as we go forward. And to be completely fair, the Giants' defensive line actually dominated that supposed, and it really is, the Cowboys, the greatest offensive line in football, the Dallas Cowboys. They didn't look like it on Sunday. They really didn't. The Giants got to them, and it's not going to happen every week. And I even think it starts this week in Washington. I do respect the Redskins' defensive line, especially on the edges with Kerrigan and Preston Smith coming up as a up-and-coming player. But in that interior, I think they're going to have a lot. They're going to be able to protect up that interior. I think Prescott will have more time. And we even saw in the preseason, Prescott and Bryant had a nice little connection in the red zone. So I think Bryant's kind of going to be that same wide receiver he's always been, mostly just a red zone guy. If you really look at it, he hasn't had too many 100-yard games in his career for how many games he's played. I think he has 15 and just under 50 games career. So I don't think he's going to be an elite wide receiver 1 going forward, but he's definitely going to be on that borderline wide receiver 2 and a guy who's going to score a lot of touchdowns. And I think at this point you're not going to get that kind of return in a trade.
Yeah. And you know what, Dan? It's 25 targets between the two of them.
Wow. That's insane. I knew it was up there.
You could be quoted and then some.
Yeah, that's even better. I like when you correct me, Brandon.
No, I wanted to support you and be I know. You thought you were being outlandish. No. I was like, no, you weren't outlandish enough, my friend.
It's a true team effort around here.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we will look at some daily fantasy plays for all of you. All right. Welcome back. We will now get into some daily plays, contrarian, value plays, etc. Let's just start off with probably the most appetizing game of the week. Saints and Giants. Between the two of you, is there anyone on either Saints or the Giants we should not have in our daily lineups this week?
Ooh, not have.
Kobe Fleener?
Yeah, there we go.
All right, we covered that.
I don't want to be...
Well, and Dan, you had a good statistic on what each of the Saints and Giants finished last year in the game they played last year, right?
Yeah, I mean, last year the score was 52-49. It was an overtime shootout. We're talking about 13 touchdowns between Breeze and Eli. There's a lot of things going on there. Beckham had 130 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Saints refused to use bracket coverage on him for whatever reason. And that's why this week I think Sterling Shepard's getting a lot more play so far in DFS from a lot of the stuff I've been reading, a lot of the buzz. But I actually think Beckham, this is the week to play him. Not only do we look at last year's stats and say, okay, he can repeat that, but the Saints are not the type of team that's gonna use bracket coverage on him, and that means he's gonna see some outside matchups with Saints 2015 third rounder PJ Williams, who wasn't very good last week, and Ken Crawley, the undrafted free agent who came in for Delvin Pro and proceeded to grade out as the single worst cornerback last week in Pro Football Focus. He's going to be on the outside, and if they put Beckham on his side and the Saints refuse to throw a safety over the top, I cannot see any reason why Eli Manning wouldn't throw the ball his way every single time that happens.
There's just going to be a murder out there, and we're just going to be all witness to it.
But I will say one thing to Brandon's point, and I do agree with everything she said on Kobe Fleener. I think she was also the first on that bandwagon. But at least for me, for tournament-type plays, for GPPs, think if you're going to play Fleener in the early going before he gets going, if he gets going, it really has to be in this matchup against the Giants because they really just can't cover tight ends. This has been an issue for them for years. Kelvin Shepard's their middle linebacker. He's arguably the worst pass coverage Mike. He's going to be in the league this year. They really just don't have the personnel to do it.
Well, no, all you got to do is look last week at what Jason Witten did.
Right. They made Witten look like he was a third-year player. I mean, and
right.
We all know he's not that anymore. So I understand the I won't call it hate, but the shade on Fleener as a season-long play at this point. But as far as this week, I got to throw him into at least one of my GPPs.
Yeah, I think, again, a daily yes, because when you hit on him, when he finally figures it out, it's going to pay off huge. Mm-hmm. And certainly if you're putting in a variety of lineups, yeah, I mean, he's playing for the Saints. It could be a lot worse. I will say, though, I mean, we always have to bring it up because it's true. Drew Brees at home versus away is a very different person.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm not quite sure this would be the week that Coby Fleener actually would break out. And again, that game that we were talking about with the huge over-under and everything else, that was in New Orleans, not in New York. So a very different environment. You know, if you're looking at, you know, pass attempts, he actually makes more pass attempts on the road, but they're not good. He, you know, it's
they're
just
not good pass attempts.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, he averages like 334 yards in the split, 317 out of the split.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's not like a huge drop off, but it's really, you know, the touchdowns. He goes from over 3 to just over 1 per game, and for interceptions, he goes just over 1 away versus like 0.7 home. Yeah. So the difference is stark, you know, especially when it comes to the touchdowns. So, you know, it makes me a little bit nervous. But hey, you know, one of these is going to be a trap at some point, right? One of these New Orleans games. I guess the thing is that I don't care. I'm still going to go with it. But I did want to point out the game splits for Drew Brees because I sometimes think that people think that's an exaggeration, but it really isn't.
Yeah. All right, so we've got some other quarterbacks that are cheaper than Drew Brees that we mentioned you may want to avoid. Drew Brees, by the way, is the most expensive quarterback this week on DraftKings, for example. But some other quarterbacks, I think it was Brandon that you mentioned Kirk Cousins, or Dan?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Did you, Dan?
Yeah, we both are on that bandwagon this week.
Well, I don't think – listen, I'm going to talk about this Washington game real quick. Washington did not know how bad their defense was. They got shocked.
They didn't know? Or
I don't think so.
No, they just couldn't do anything about it.
There is no way they would have kept with that game plan with Norman on the side and not set up a bracket, do something for Antonio Brown. It made zero sense. But the problem is I don't think they thought they had the personnel that could do it.
Right.
I think there are a lot of problems. And poor Breland. If I heard his name one more time on that broadcast, I was going to cry for him. It was just really sad. So what I'm going to say is that I think that they are now restructuring their offense to go into every game thinking they're going to be in a shootout. They were obviously doing a lot more dink and dunks, things like that. I think we're talking about garbage time. I think we're looking at a Blake Bortles season. I think maybe he's going to be less accurate, throw more interceptions, but I think he's actually going to maybe get more fantasy points. I believe that there is just no way that they can go into a game being conservative from this point on. That was a huge embarrassment against the Steelers. And the Steelers are great, but wow, they were exposed. And it wasn't just Antonio Brown. I was actually more upset with what D'Angelo Williams did to that team because they were also able to set the tone. They were able to control the clock. D'Angelo Williams just pounded. I mean, I don't think the guy ever had a play for negative yards. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, and to your point on Cousins, I mean, you know, we all heard the debate on Matt Jones and if he's really good or is it just he's got the opportunity. They've got 4 really good pass catchers in Washington that they can utilize between Jackson and Garcon to an extent. They've got Dotson, obviously. Jordan Reed, who some would say is the best tight end this side of Gronkowski. And they've got Jamison Crowder, too, who actually saw more attention than Garcon last week. So it's not like they don't have the tools in the passing game to do exactly what you said, which is just chuck it every time, you know. All right. That covers it for quarterbacks. Let's talk about some running backs, besides the ones playing in the Giants and Saints games, which we've already covered. Jeremy Langford, I think this was you, Brandon. Obviously, not a great game last week against Houston, but again, it was a good defense. Playing Philadelphia this week, and fairly reasonably priced.
Yeah, because he's a bell cow. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I understand the hate for all of his metrics. I know that we're a metric site. I get it. I'm looking at points, and I'm telling you, this guy gets fantasy points, and he gets opportunities, and they're not going anywhere else. And I don't know what else to say. I just, at some point, you have to accept that it is what it is. And I didn't see anything in that game that would have changed John Fox's mind about Jeremy Langford. And as far as I can tell, Jeremy Langford's snap counts are out of control. So just roll with it. He's so cheap for what he is.
Yeah. Hey, another running back, Dan, that you had mentioned before, C.J. Anderson, who, is priced in the top 10, but he plays a Colts defense who also were exposed as not being very good. What's his potential this week, you think?
So I will be completely honest here. I have Anderson in every single one of my lineups this week. I'm talking everything we've got because I think that we all were kind of maybe 1 year too early on Anderson. Obviously, last year I had high hopes for him in that Peyton Manning running back in the offense, but it didn't happen. He wasn't healthy, and then finally during that stretch run, he turned it on. But we're talking about a guy who ripped off 139 total yards and 2 touchdowns on just 24 touches last week. And that was against the 4th best overall defense in 2015, the Carolina Panthers. Things are about to get a lot easier for him this week because the Colts finished as our 23rd best run defense in 2015, and that was with a healthy Henry Anderson for 9 games, and they had Jarrell Freeman. Freeman's gone. Anderson didn't suit up for week 1, recovering from the ACL. He might not be back week 2. And those were their 2 best run defenders by a wide margin in 2015. So what's left of this unit, it's not very pretty. They finished as our 2nd worst run defense last week against the Lions, who also finished as our 27th best run blocking unit in 2015. These are just like matchups these are the type of games that shouldn't be happening in these kind of matchups. I mean, Theo Riddick and Amir Abdullah ripped off 108 yards on 19 carries. These are not really 2 elite backs. So I'm thinking that this Gary Kubiak run-happy scheme is finally starting to get its legs under them. Russell Okung, they added at left tackle. He's the perfect fit for the zone blocking. So to me, I just think Anderson's ready to dominate this game. 2 touchdowns, 150-plus yards, the whole deal.
Well, yeah, and to your point, they averaged 5 yards a carry last week between Abdullah, Riddick.
I'm sorry. Yeah, against the Colts defense. Yeah, I thought you were talking about Anderson, but yeah, of
course. No, yeah. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think that is very, very intriguing. You had also mentioned Danny Woodhead for this week.
Yeah, I think for me, the Woodhead play just comes to the fact that he's still just way too cheap for what his role is. At this point, and I had such high hopes for Melvin Gordon. He was the feature of a lot of my preseason pieces because I thought maybe this Chargers coaching staff could finally start to get that he can do a lot of the same things that Woodhead can do. He forced the 7th most missed tackles in 2015, and he was our third most elusive back in week 1. But clearly there's a disconnect between the management that traded up to get him in the 2015 draft and the coaching staff because Gordon played only 23 of 73 snaps in week 1. Woodhead took the majority of the rest, and most of that came after Keenan Allen left the game, because without Keenan Allen in the game, Rivers needs his most trusted, or his 2nd most trusted, if you want to give Gates the number 1 spot, pass-catching option, and that's Woodhead. So we're still looking at a guy who's going to get red zone snaps, carries, and targets, and he's going to be basically the lead back there for San Diego. Their defense, like Brandon has talked about and basically pointed out in the best fashion possible, is not there. It's not a good defense. So this is a team that's going to be playing from behind a lot. Woodhead's going to be on the field, like I said, red zone, pass catching, and just a lead back role. His salary hasn't caught up to what he is.
Right. I was going to say, for example, on DraftKings, he's still the 20th price running back,
right,
but scored 23 points last week.
Yeah.
So,
it's nuts.
All right. We had talked about the Saints-Giants game, but in particular, Brandon, you had mentioned Victor Cruz, a name we haven't heard from in a long time. What are you feeling on him this week?
Yeah, well, again, I think that we're talking about a really bad defense and an offense that scores a lot of points, the New Orleans Saints, right? So they're going to need to catch up with that with the Giants. I think that they want to get Cruz a home touchdown. He is a hometown favorite. No, and I mean, I don't want to go down narrative street, but I went down narrative street about the first game, and I was right about that too. I was like, they want to get that rookie a touchdown, and they want to get Cruz a touchdown because they want people to stop defending Odell Beckham Jr. the way that they defend him, and they're going to have to do that. Right? Because now you realize that they are going to pass the ball, especially in the red zone, to people other than Odell Beckham. So it's not just the narrative of, give the home team that salsa that they won, they've waited for a year and a half, but also get any kind of coverage off of Odell Beckham Jr. that's humanly possible. And I think that that's the smart thing to do. If I was the coach, that's what I would do. It's the perfect opportunity. Now, I don't think they're going to do anything stupid. They're not going to try to get Eli to get an interception in the red zone. So I don't think that's the case.
Well, I don't think they ever want that. It just happens organically.
Right. But the New Orleans Saints don't have a good enough defense to have someone decent on Victor Cruz.
Right.
I mean, I'm not trying to be rude or disparaging. I mean, obviously they're all in the National Football League.
It's the truth, Brandon.
But yeah, I mean, let's be honest. They do not have enough people to be able to defend Odell Beckham Jr. and Sterling Shepard and Victor Cruz all at the same time. And they're going to do three wide receiver sets. That's what they're going to do.
Well, and that leads me to one more question on the Giants stand. So, all preseason and offseason, the tight end position was one up for debate. Was it Will Tae? Was it Larry Donnell? What do you see as being the better play as far as Giants tight ends go?
I actually advised to avoid this situation all offseason, and my opinion stays the same. They rotated snaps almost evenly. They actually, to the point where they actually rotated series. So the first series went to Donnell, the second to Ty. And the Giants used, as Brandon just mentioned, the Giants used 11 personnel featuring 3 wide receivers on 50 of 56 snaps. And this isn't a game where they barely trailed. They didn't really trail for much that game. Ben McAdoo is clearly making that change from Tom Coughlin, where he's going to get his best players on the field regardless of the situation, because he knows that's the best way to win. And I think Giants fans like that, and I think it's also good for fantasy owners who have those 3 receivers at some point. So as far as the tight ends go, I will say this. The one thing is, on Ty's second series, which was the Giants, or on Ty's first series, which was the Giants' first touchdown series, Donnell actually rotated into the game when the Giants got into the red zone, and Donnell's going to be the red zone guy. He's 6'6". He's the better guy there. He's more proven than Ty. So if you're going to have to put a gun to my head and tell me to take one of them, I'm going Donnell because of the red zone threat. But he had 1 catch last week, so let's not get too crazy there.
Hey, but it was a good catch, though.
It was a great catch for fantasy purposes.
All right, I think that might do it for this episode. I do want to get both of your opinions as New Yorkers. What is Ben McAdoo doing with his hair? Brandon, you can go first.
It's the dude ombre.
Oh, is that? Yeah, but that's not good, right?
I didn't make a judgment. I just called it what it is. Yeah, I mean, the guy
this
still.
This is very hard-hitting fantasy analysis we're jumping into.
Yeah. Hey, if the guy is still rocking a stash, who am I? Who am I to say anything?
Yeah. Right.
My dad still has a mustache.
Well, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
I did see somebody, I think it was on Twitter, say the thing that freaks us out about Ben McAdoo, like his look, is like his goatee, mustache, and hair all different colors. Like it's all a mix. Like there's some dark, there's some light. Like you don't know what it is. It just throws you off every time.
Yeah. Well, you're both young men, but my husband kind of has that.
Oh.
Because this grade first.
He doesn't listen, right?
Are you saying you kind of have a crush on Ben McAdoo?
I mean, a little bit. A little bit. Every once in a while I call Carson Ben, and it's just weird. But it's interesting where people gray at first. Right. It's like, you're like, is that?
It's random. And you don't plan for it, but it just happens.
I just think he has the same style from like 1994. And he just has rocked it.
Well, and he's gonna wear one of those like Pro Line jackets. What were those? What was that brand? No, the starter jackets. Remember
starter
those? Really
jackets,
big, fluffy jackets. Like he should totally be wearing one of those.
Oh, I mean, he showed up to his first press conference to be announced as the Giants head coach with a suit that was about 3 sizes too big for him. And it was the headline in the New York Post. I forgot what it was, and it was like unbelievable. It's just like this thing lingered in the media for like 3 days. You can find pictures of this suit online. It was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen.
I will look at that. Thank you.
I don't think he put too much time into his wardrobe.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, as long as Eli and Odell keep producing fantasy points, I don't think any of us
Exactly.
will care.
Exactly.
We don't care. You do
All right.
you, Ben.
Exactly.
You do you.
Whatever makes you happy and keep good fantasy teams, I don't care.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, that will do it for this episode. For Brandon, Marianne Lee, and Dan Schneier, this has been the Fantasy Slant.